Colleagues, thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much also to our colleagues online. So we are starting our afternoon of sessions with a wonderful session on a session on challenges we're facing in the arts and humanities. And we're really delighted to be able to welcome Professor Joe Fox, who is Dean and Chief Executive of the School of Advanced Study and Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research and Public Engagement at the University of London, a specialist in the history of propaganda in Britain and Germany. Useful. And currently, in fact, having finished a leadership project on the political warfare, executive covert propaganda and British culture, and multiple other things that you're involved in. But you're here today in your sort of role as a convening power for the arts and humanities in the UK and elsewhere. And we're really delighted to welcome you and to hear what you have to say about the challenges facing all of us.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and you'll forgive me for being a tiny bit jaded and tired this morning. I'm still going straight through from 2:30 this morning. I've been up that whole time, but totally worth it if you will allow me that indulgence. Okay, so thanks so much for this invitation to speak with you today. I think it really matters for us to come together today to understand what's changing and, most importantly, how we respond. So I'll start with a bit of context, some of the wider picture, and then maybe a few provocations, if you'll allow me. So you'll all know, many of you actually in this room very directly, that the shape of arts and humanities provision is changing rapidly. The School of Advanced Study, in collaboration with Emma and Thea at the Arts and Humanities Alliance, we've been monitoring the effects of the significant scale of course closures and significant reductions in provision across the UK. And to give you some context, since 2021, we have 74 institutions that have announced a reduction of capacity in the arts and humanities and/or closure of entire units and courses. That represents 45% of all UK universities. So we're nearly at the halfway mark. And it's worth noting that those course closures and reduction in capacity spans all disciplines and indeed all types of institutions. But we might also note that the effects are particularly profound in some disciplines, notably modern languages, and within some institutions. In particular, we're monitoring the post-science. And that trend, I think, arises from a range of factors, all of which will be known to you and are well understood, but I might just go over them again here. The maintenance of the tuition fee cap since 2017, at a time of very high inflation, that has severely squeezed all institutional budgets. A reduction in higher cost subject funding in certain areas, take, for example, the creative arts from 36 million to 16.7 million, that compounds the fee cap. Visa policy changes has had a significant impact, and it's made it harder for institutions to balance the budgets in certain course areas, and very difficult to attract international students, as you'll know, which depletes a key source of institutional income. Regulatory reform has also played a part. Prior to 2018, when the OFS began operating, HEFGE had a responsibility to consider overall provision and the pattern of provision across England, monitor changes affecting provision and availability, and importantly, intervene where necessary to preserve strategically important provision. The OFS has had a much more restricted remit in that regard and less funding with which to act. Now, that's a bigger context, but that trend has had major implications for arts and humanities specifically. Every institution, I think, will consider that it's acting rationally. indeed out of financial necessity in making course closures. And well, I'm not saying that course closures are always wrong, but arts and humanities courses have often been seen as easier to select for closure because it's perceived that applicant demand is soft and will more easily flow into retained subjects because they're less reliant on physical infrastructure and because the associated research and commercialization income is much lower. And that's among other reasons. But what's now emerging is a systemic picture in which many institutions are making similar arts and humanities course closures independently, simultaneously, and rapidly. And that results in a serious threat to overall regional and national provision. So institutions are often responding to the same forecasts and the same market challenges, and they're doing so, though, to such an extent that the sector as a whole could dramatically overcorrect versus the true demand for some of our subjects and the skills and opportunities that they generate, both from applicants through to businesses and organisations in wider society and the economy. Now, that in turn, in my view, has the potential to undermine critical UK strategic needs. And in some areas, we're either beyond that point or we're very close to being at that point. And I think modern languages is an obvious example. It's absolutely clear that the loss of modern languages provision creates a disadvantage, a very clear disadvantage for our people in a globalized world. You only have to pick up any newspaper in the last 12 months to realize that business, diplomacy, and security are all reliant on these advanced language skills, particularly language skills that are required with contextual, historical, political, and cultural understanding. We only have to ask ourselves, how specifically should diplomacy and security be conducted effectively without understanding the mindsets and values of other nations and peoples? I was sitting in, for 2 days, I've been sitting in a knowledge economy and knowledge diplomacy conference in which diplomats were saying exactly this thing. We don't need people necessarily who are just linguistically competent, but also culturally competent. So that lack of linguistic combined with cultural capacity is a major opportunity cost to the UK economy and to its standing in the world. In other areas, there is a depletion of hard skills needed to underpin the UK's hugely successful creative industries. Already there, provision is becoming patchy at the exact point where a robust pipeline is needed. Figures vary on this, but at the minimum, it's worth 84 billion to the UK economy with a predicted 900,000 jobs needed by 2030, mainly actually for young people. We've also got a loss of networking capacity and innovation for people. If you think how these industries work, a large part of the value of a creative and critical education is generated by bringing students and practitioners together to form networks, which later drive the labour market matching and economic activity in the creative sectors. That's how creative businesses recruit talent and access new ideas. We're also seeing a reduced skills acquisition through lifelong learning. Many adult learners rely on arts and humanities-based routes to access higher education later in life. And those courses generate broad skills and often more flexible entry requirements and delivery arrangements. Let's not forget the damage that is being done to social mobility. Students in some areas now do not have equal, or in some cases, any access to creative and critical higher education. And that has especially impacted students living from home due to financial caring or other reasons. They're more likely to be from low participation backgrounds. Now, all of that, and now I'm going to say this with a little bit of joy, all of that has been compounded by negative rhetoric from our former government, whether through an implied connection between our disciplines and rip-off Mickey Mouse or low-value degrees, or through an emphasis on STEM that sometimes in this rhetoric sits in opposition to creative and critical education, even though that we know that they do not or cannot sit in isolation. Well, let's hope we've at least seen a change in that. At the very least, we can look to our new government to change that. And in that, we are going to hold them to their manifesto promises in that regard, which does emphasise creative and critical education, and very clearly and explicitly. So, and I think it's also true to say that the new government recognises at the very least the importance of modern languages, and in particular the shortage of teachers in that area, and actually of the arts and humanities more broadly. But they've got to act quickly now, because once courses are closed, provision is removed, and research capacity and expertise are lost, it is going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to replace them. So in languages, it's not as if the problem's unknown or that it couldn't be predicted. So in preparation for today, I had a just quick scan of Google to see reports produced on the crisis of modern languages. There's loads of them. Languages provision in FE, language learning in HE, the importance of languages in a global context, an international call to action towards a national languages strategy, languages in the UK, a call to action, cognitive benefits of language learning, briefing on languages, born global, loss for words, need for languages in the UK, diplomacy and security, language state of the nation. That's just in the last 10 years. There's a lot of them. So the question now for all of us is what is to be done? And I put the emphasis on the word done. We have the information we need, but the question is, how do you apply that? So if I may, I'll just offer a few thoughts as to what that could look like. First of all, we've got to train ourselves to be skilled advocates. We have not yet made the compelling case that will force change. The school will be trying to help with that by launching a National Arts and Humanities Advocacy Programme to equip us with the skills that we need to use all the valuable data that has been captured by the British Academy and others. We need to use that data to maximum effect in the many contexts in which we operate. The second thing is that I'm firmly of the belief that as a community, we need to lean into and play a much more active role in campaigns to change the school curriculum. The narrow curriculum that we have does not serve students well, and it forces subject choice before any real exposure to the breadth of disciplines and to the skills base that they provide. It's surely time for a reconsideration of that whole curriculum that embraces modern languages as an essential part of a creative, critical, and scientific education. I come back to the point I made about the OFS. We need absolutely to push for a national oversight of skills, training, and subject areas, including local and national provision of strategically important skills. And that includes modern languages, and indeed all the creative and critical disciplines, because they all feed current economic needs. But, and I really want to make this point forcefully actually, that contribute to seeing, again, university education as a social good. The economic benefits of all of higher education are evident, and you have a look at the recent UUK work. There's some really now compelling data around the earning power across every single area and every single discipline and every single industry of a higher education. That's clear, the data's there. But in doing that, let's not lose sight of the wider value to the individual and society when we come to make the argument about why we should continue to teach and fund humanities and indeed universities more broadly. And let's all show up. That includes vice chancellors, everyone, and all of us here, and especially those of us who are not here. I realise I'm talking to a group of people who are obviously making that case already. Touched it. That's touched someone. That's tickled someone. But let's all show up to make that case. And I think it might be better for us to demand, as Jonathan Grant has recently argued, that graduates leave our programmes not just work ready, but world ready. And I really can't think of a better time to make sure that our graduates are going into the world in that state. And I think that a creative and critical education, arts and humanities education, plays a vital role in making that possible. And that, I think, brings us back to a fundamental point about what a university is for. And we can't lose sight of that. It's not only time for us to lean into that debate, but actually to lead it, or as my boss recently said, we should be making the weather, not simply just. Now, those things, of course, are not solely in our gift, but there are things that are. But to address those things, I think we have to ask ourselves some very hard questions. How, and I'm just putting these out as a provocation rather than a viewpoint, how sustainable is our commitment to research-led teaching in the ways that we currently articulate it? And how sustainable is the current balance between research and education? What is the appropriate balance between research and education? What is PGT for? Is the doctorate fit for purpose in its current form? What should our curriculum look like? And I think there is a really big question around. It's not just schools curriculum we're talking about reforming, it's our own. How do we break down that system of single and joint honours, hard and fast disciplinary boundaries, and provide actually more fluid pathways for students in all kinds of configurations? And how might we reconceive the place of arts and humanities in the wider curriculum? I had a fascinating discussion with someone from a business school saying leadership is all about, it's going to be about, in the world of AI, it's going to be about critical judgment. So how do we go do what we do in a business school, teach future leaders who might think about things really quite differently? And I think that repositioning of skills and value to other programs. I don't mean service teaching, just to be really clear about that. We're not in service to the disciplines. We are adding genuine real value to them through the skills that we provide. And that will be really important. And so many reports are coming out now about the kinds of future skills that will be needed in the age of AI. And everyone is really on the same page here. And it's not arts and humanities people who are saying this. And I think this is a really important point for us to bear in mind. Human skills, judgment, critical thought, they are going to become dominant. And they're going to become dominant, not just in an economic sense. We are and if you look around in terms of the geopolitical situation, are going to experience a deep and sustained challenge to democratic values. And that is perhaps the greatest role that we are going to play. Now, that will take all of us to reinvent what we do, or at least to prioritise the relevant elements of what we already do, because a lot of this is already going on, but it remains invisible. And if we don't do this now, then when? And I'll leave it there. Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Jo, for that brilliant summary and all of the provocations, which I'm sure have piqued our interest and curiosity. Is there anyone who wants to jump in and either answer some of the provocations or make some other comments, questions?
Thank you very much. I'd like to speak more, and I actually will not answer the provocations because I think they are very timely. Very much indeed. I wanted to ask you or challenge you a little bit about the premise of what is happening. You said that we do risk an overcorrection at the moment because that the universities, or what you said is that the universities all across the UK are closing subjects independently of each other. I think that what's emerged from our experience again is that actually rather than the consultancy terms, grossly overpaid consultancy firms. We at the moment Freedom of Information Act at the University of Kent is Freedom of Information Academy recorded showed that just for this round of structure became in excess of £3 million in 2 years, consultancy firms, to tell us exactly what the same consultancy firms told each every single other university that is undergoing their structure. So, to the point that we can see Forsdick, there were letters that were addressed to the university. So, how independently of each other are we the university plenaries?
Because regardless of what the consultancy firms are saying, and they do, use this kind of one size fits all, that is broadly a problem with all consultancy. And you see that also with the data that is provided to management teams that are making these decisions. They're working off similar sets of data, all of which, by the way, the subject associations have been doing a remarkable job of challenging. But the fundamental point remains the same, regardless of how you seek to solve it. Okay, you bring in consultancy firms or whatever, but the fundamentals remain the same. And that is our universities are experiencing a systemic funding crisis. It just comes down to this. And if you want some sort of sobering reading, it was a consultancy firm, but you'll forgive me. It's PwC in this case. They did a piece of work commissioned by UUK. It's a really good report. And what it shows is if the current trends carry on with migrant visas being restricted for higher education and the student numbers being bundled in with the overall migration figures, fee cap remaining the same, all of those factors that I described, 80% of universities will be showing a structural deficit, 80. And this points to, regardless of what you bring in, the fundamental issue is the same. And it's not for no reason that the Labour Party actually named in their manifesto that higher education is in crisis. It is, it is. And I think unless we tackle that problem, then we are almost certainly looking at a continued pattern of what you've experienced at Ken. And I am really genuinely very sorry for everything that you're going through. We've been working with your colleagues at Ken and at Goldsmiths. We're fully aware of the impacts of these things. Equally, when you speak to a lot of vice chancellors, they're desperate in these situations as well, because the funding crisis is so acute. Then we have, for us, compounded the problem of the numbers coming into the courses. I mean, you have situations where people who are coming top in the ref are now being closed because the numbers aren't there. So ultimately, the solution lies in this systemic crisis. It does. And please read that report. It's really revealing reading. It is driven by excellent data and sober analysis. And it's being taken very seriously. And I think that's why we're seeing a renewed discussion of this in political circles. Sue Gray has got universities on her 6 things to solve in the first 100 days.
Yes, I just want to mention here, I think joining forces as part of educating also advocacy experience. It might be sensible if we have something, I don't know whether the website or something, links to all kinds of resources and links to that, if someone wants to improve their skills in advocacy, they can refer to whatever that was for word of mouth. It's really difficult and challenging to find all this, particularly, for example, if we have different universities, different experiences, if there is a link to them, so if people are willing to share and help each other.
Just going to take the letters point first and then work back.
I mean,
I'm just going to take it and work back. On the whole, there are some examples where letters work. Aberdeen is a great one. Okay, Aberdeen is a great one. But on the whole, broadly, they don't work because ultimately they're not solving or can't solve what I've just described. So it doesn't really get us. However, there are ways of accessing that data. Pointing first and foremost to the SHAPE Observatory, the BA SHAPE Observatory. We actually need one source of data half of our problem is we're grabbing data from all different places and we're making lots of simultaneous but coordinated arguments. So let's go there. There is a set of data on one hand from Shape Observatory specific to arts, humanities and social sciences. There's a lot of data there. And secondly, the UK website is great for the kinds of data I've been talking about, the wider contextual data around higher education earnings, around financial sustainability of the sector. So you bring those two together, you've got it. The advocacy programme that we'll be running will give you more specific lines for arguments that you can pursue in your own institutions and more broadly, depending on the stakeholders that you will engage with. But I have to say, here we can really learn some lessons from STEM. They are coordinated in their advocacy through things like CASE, the Campaign for Science and Engineering. The chemists have done this. There are lots of examples of coordination. I really think we need it because at the moment we talk in fragmented ways, we talk in parallel ways, our arguments cross one another, and that means there's too many voices. And I think we ought to lean into some of the voices we already have and provide our backing. So organisations like the AHRC, which work tirelessly behind the scenes, regardless of doctoral controversies, but do work tirelessly, the British Academy. You know, let's lean behind them and make sure we're giving them the backing that they need to make those arguments on our behalf. And then let's equip ourselves using the resources that they provide for all of us to make those arguments locally.
Thank you so much. And that's the question.
Yeah, hi. Do you think there's any prospect with the change of government of reversing policy? I think I want to use like that or their government, where non-languages are no longer mandatory in GCSE level.
Yeah, possibly.
I mean, you know, speaking to your point about curriculum and talking of change, that's been devastating.
Yeah,
you know, in terms
absolutely.
of the university.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, it's all to play for is what I would say. I think that we are now at a position where people are more open to hearing it. So I think that is where, and we've been taking a lot of policy advice from people who are in the know. And I think that reforming the school curriculum is an obvious place for us to start, because that is causing some of the pipeline issues. And it has also been on the agenda for a long, long time. And I think now is the point at which we ought to get behind a significant curriculum change programme. Whether they've got the appetite for that, or whether in fact the schools can actually cope with that. If you think about the pressures that schools are actually under. But we can't just allow that to persist, because it's not good for the education of our young people. And it's not good for maintaining the diversity of skills that we are going to need. It's no good pushing very narrow skills and then find out that the world has changed around us due to technology or whatever other reason. We're not equipped. So virtually every other country has a much broader curriculum than we do. So I think if there's a moment, it's now. So, but we have to lean into it and lead some of those campaigns ourselves too.
Just to echo what you just said about schools coping. I know so many people hope this is a magic bullet, and I don't want anyone to stop campaigning. But my understanding is at year 9, when languages are compulsory, is it a third of schools that are not offering languages despite being compulsory because of teachership?
They can't.
So yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to add that fact. But I did have some comment, a question, if that's all right. A different question. It's just slightly nervous about feeding into the former government's Mickey Mouse rhetoric. And you said something, and I wonder what you meant. You said something about diplomats saying to you that we are both culturally and linguistically competent, saying that culturally competent is really important. I'm sure everyone in the room agrees. I don't think there are any language degrees in this country, whatever they look like, where people are even linguistically competent, it's not culturally competent. And I just want to say that because I worry that some
perhaps some people working in some universities look at some degrees in other universities and feel that the culturally competent aspect is missing. I don't think that's true. I hope you don't think that's true.
No, I don't, but what I'm addressing there is, and what you see quite often, and you will know this better than me, but what we've seen as part of the trend, when we've been working with departments straight and closure, sometimes the solution is actually to do service language teaching without that element. And we've been trying to say, no, this is not actually a good plan. Because what we're being told by the sectors that are going to use some of these skills is it's that combination. So what we don't want to do is see things reduced to just to straight up and down language provision. And we've heard that actually from the people that we've been helping, who are telling us we're worried about this, but so are the end users of it. So that's really what I meant by that.
Actually, about curriculum reform, reading languages, probably could bet most people through know about it and are not happy with it, and most teachers. It's about the competence. What's the strategy? Go to teachers or a new government, and they actually, in some of the context that it's completely formed, that it was led by a civil servant who with a particular view of how languages should be done. And this person is still, around. So I think that, what's the strategy? Is it a humanities one?
No, it's everything. I mean, a whole curriculum reform. And it was really interesting. Last week we had the Humanities Summit here, you were there, where we heard Tessa Blackstone talk about the broadening of the curriculum. It's something that she's campaigned long for. And that means whole curriculum, not bits, whole. So that you're embracing the breadth of the curriculum in much longer, and also seeing the breadth of the curriculum much more dominant in early years. And I think I'm not talking about parts of the curriculum. I think that's how it's been approached, but it actually needs a curriculum-wide approach. And she was talking actually more along the lines of international baccalaureate.
Hi, thank you. That was brilliant, and I largely agree. But I had a question about sustainability, and I understand that you're talking about sustainability in the context of what we do and how we want to adapt it to the new context. And I agree. However, I was also thinking of this in terms of our workloads, my lives, and the challenge of doing this when it feels like we're perceived as not areas of growth within our institutions. So it's very often we don't have any support on a practical level. So. How do we square that out?
Yeah, it's a good comeback on that, because that is a real tension in a lot of places where these restructuring, particularly where these restructurings are taking place, is seeing a doubling of workload, which leaves you no time to be able to do the kind of thinking that I've suggested. And there are two things that I would suggest. One is really deciding what you're not going to do, and prioritizing what you are. And the second is actually to really flip some of the way that you engage with the institution. And it's to try to find out or get behind what are the issues facing the institution that you can be the solution to. There'll often be a way in. That's about really looking at the strategy. It could be things around civic engagement, it could be schools, there'll be something in there. Anchor it on and say, listen, we can do this through, and then prioritize some of that work. It's a safer place. Quite often we're seeing that when we're talking to individuals going through this, the strategy that works is if you take it that way. We can reposition what we do, and here's how we're going to rethink what we do in line with the universal strategy in X, Y, Z. But the fact of the matter is the challenge still comes down to the numbers. It comes down to the numbers, and in almost every single case, even when you do that, it's the numbers coming into the progress. How do you combine different ways to bulk up the numbers if you can? There are different kinds of strategies, lots of answers to that question. But if you don't start sort of prioritising some of these things, I really do fear that things won't be there. They're not going to be there. And we're seeing it go thick and fast. It's happening so quickly. It's dominoes. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. I don't have a magic solution.
Charles, and I think that we
Okay,
might.
one more.
Sorry,
Is it like one?
one more.
Yes. Joe, thanks for that, and thank you for the leadership that SAS is offering this area. It's really good that we're something we actually can get behind that. I think it was particularly inspiring to hear what you had to say today. Which I can imagine what possible future might look like. Joe, I've got a question about some levels of granularity,
Yeah.
which I know you're grappling with in SAS. And thinking about the relationship between advocacy of the arts and humanities and advocacy of individual disciplinary areas.
Yeah.
And with language and linguistics, and UCFL is a classic example, with multiple subdisciplinary areas as well. And it's just the interesting is talking about the strategic challenge of finding ways to avoid duplication, certainly to avoid contradiction, but to make sure there's implementation across the different levels.
Yeah, it's a really good question. We need disciplinary advocacy. So this is not in any way to replace that. The subject associations, groups like this do a remarkable job because there's specificities with each of the cases. The historians are going to be arguing for something different for the English language and linguistic. Anyway, they're different, so you need that. We do, though, need a point at which those similarities come together and overlap, and that we're clear about those points of overlap, and that we coordinate that messaging, the group of our disciplines, because there are some commonalities. And I think as long as we're clear on the commonalities, and that's what we're hoping the advocacy work will help to do, to bring subject associations and groups together, to understand what they're pursuing individually, but also to identify where those commonalities exist and where we speak together and where we speak apart. And just clarity on that issue is really important. You've already seen the coming together of the disciplinary groups. I think that's really powerful. When they work together, it works really well. English have done this brilliantly, and they've coordinated all education, schools, right through to advanced research, and that's working very well. But I think that needs to be overlaid with a broader set of messaging. Now, where that takes place, I think that's a really important discussion. I think we can, in the school, we can do some of the work in bringing people together and brokering and convening. But ultimately, I think we ought to look to our big national academies to make that argument for us and with us. So we can bring people together, we can coordinate, we can decide what messages from the grassroots, but then it needs our national voice to work hard to make that much bigger argument with government and others. We can do a lot of the groundwork, but we really need them, one voice, be behind it. We can't just throw rocks. It's not going to work.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And
Pleasure.
thanks to Joe. That's really inspiring call to arms.
Happening in the languages in the world around us. So obviously modern languages has traditionally been where UCFL came from and probably is still the most significant part of the membership. But classical languages, heritage languages, Welsh, Wallet, etc., community languages, sign languages, all of these are playing much more prominent roles in the society around us. And whatever our own disciplinary background, mine is French, but whatever our disciplinary background, we have a duty to engage with colleagues in the whole range of languages and to intervene where we can helpfully to promote the kind of multilingual and tolerant society that most of us, I think, aspire to, hopefully do ourselves. So, strategic issues and policy issues. How do we make change happen in the policy areas? And what have we done in the past? How did we get here? That's what you're asking to talk about. And I divide it into three broad areas: organise, inform, and advocates. And I think those have been our three key roles in this area of affecting policy in the ways that we're able to. Oh, right.
Finally.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much. Right, so first one, organising and collaborating. And I'm going to do a little bit of anecdotes here, I'm afraid. So the first picture is a book we published in July 1991, which was the proceedings of a conference entitled French in the 1990s. And so this was just before the end of the binary line, and it was organised by the Association of Professors of French, as it then was, and PHF Plus as it now is. And for the first time, it included universities and polytechnics. And it involved inviting external speakers. We even had Andrew Smith, the Labour MP for Oxford, talking about policy. Of course, this was when we were expecting a Labour government in 1992, but we had to wait a little while. One of the big innovations of this brilliant event, two-day event in Birmingham, was that, I should say, Jennifer Burkett and I were the president and secretary of the chapter. One of the innovations was an intervention by Marcela. I don't know if any of you remember Marcela, an old friend who recently passed away in Fred. But she had gone from, and she'd been a lecturer in Southampton in Humanities, and went to Sunderland Polytechnic and brought the message that we in the French departments ought to be thinking about modern languages, not just about French. And the idea of all the languages talking to each other. The Germans were the hereditary enemy for us. This was new thinking in 1991. And actually it was very effective because we then realised the importance of this and started talking to all these other people who we saw in the corridors every day, but mainly avoided speaking to. And that, in fact, led to the negotiations, fairly complicated, between the universities and the polytechnic people, which led to the foundation of the University Council of Modern Languages. Now, which was an agreed arrangement between the universities and the club. And I was very fortunate to be elected the first chair of UCFL. And we started to bring the sector together in a movement that really bore fruit in lots of different ways, which I haven't got time to tell you about, but could do in questions. Organising and collaborating, the other thing I put up is a position paper by the British Academy. The British Academy took quite a long time to come to the view that it ought to be engaged in policy. And this paper, which in fact is based on a study that the Academy commissioned in 2008-2009 by the Wren group, was a study into the importance of languages in many different respects, and really started to press the academy into taking the role of convener of advocates and organisers in this sort of area. And I think that was a very important development. So, next slide, please. Summarising, this is about making change happen. Organising and collaborating is a key step. We start, as I suggested, we started by federating languages together. We then moved to looking at languages across sectors, collaborating with schools and education departments for that. UCFL founded us the United Voice for Modern Languages. We collaborated with the Association for Language Learning, which is still the primary organisation nationally for languages in the schools. With a body that existed at the time called SILT, the Centre for Information, Language Teaching and Research, a government-funded body which did part of the good work in language education, that was abolished by the government that took charge after 2010. Humanities and the role of the British Academy in bringing languages into partnership with other humanities disciplines and the broader arts area, very important. And something which I have a particular fondness for is the international partners. It's amazing how much we can learn from people in a similar situation in other countries. I spent 20 odd years in the European Language Council and discovered that when our very clever research assessment exercise was being developed in Britain, lo and behold, they had a similar experience in Denmark. And lo and behold, the French had something like that as well. So that all the kinds of experience that we could share across many European countries started to make it easier to see the big picture and see where the points of attention might be. So you can learn a lot from the people that you collaborate with. So on to the next slide, making change. Second thing you do after organising is informing, research and information. Joe earlier said that there were lots of reports on languages and heavens that there were. I'm not a great downsizer, and in my study at home, I've got a whole shelf which is chock-a-block with reports that I collected and didn't throw away. And here are a couple of them. A brilliant commissioned by the British Academy, Languages, the State of the Nation, Demand and Supply of Language Skills in the UK. This is February 2013. There was a great deal going on actually in 2013. Nigel Vincent was the man behind this, and Teresa Tinsley, formerly of SILT, did the research. And it very much has been carried on by the subsequent work on the annual work of the British Council has now taken over on limited languages. The second report was something that the Subject Centre, ILCS, published in 2004. We were very pleased at the time. 700 reasons for studying languages. We did all sorts of case studies, literature reviews and surveys and questionnaires to discover why people thought learning languages was a good idea. We ended up with 700 reasons, which are obviously built into a number of subsections. I still recommend it, and I was very pleased about 10 years later to visit the European Commission offices where they had a copy of this poster hanging on the walls, because it's been taken up by quite a lot of other countries. Not that somebody would be particularly interested in that sort of thing. There is a problem, of course, if you've got 700 reasons for studying languages, what is your USP? You can't have 700 USP, I'm afraid. And that's the point that's worth thinking about. So, research and information. Move on, please. And summarising what this involves, it's basically about making the case. You must have that came out really quite clearly in the presentations about Kent and Aberdeen as well. You have to have they have to be rights to be able to defend. And then there are all sorts of ways in which you can produce that information. You need the analysis, you need to identify the trends, and you need to be able to speak authoritatively about them. You need to have the arguments, you need to rehearse them. You don't have to say every day if you want to change it, if you vote for it. But it's good to have a number of strap lines that you do slip in fairly regularly. And certainly people who are officers and such of learned and professional associations like UCFL, I'm sure you get regularly contacted by journalists who want to know your opinion about this, that, and the other. And that's always a good opportunity to slip in about the stuff. You need recommendations. You need a list of things that you want to have, that you want to be done. So that you're not just saying, isn't it a terrible shame what's happening for languages? We can prove what's happening for languages, but you've also got to say what needs to be done. So my third category is making change, advocacy, and lobbying. And this is a prime case study in what I think was probably the most effective campaign of advocacy that I was involved in during my career, and that's the Nuffield Languages Inquiry. The report here was still worth reading, still very good, was commissioned by the Nuffield Foundation on the basis of lobbying from myself and people from the schools and language teachers and the advisors and so on. We had, and I very, very much remember, a meeting in 1997 during the period of what used to be called Burdett, when civil servants were not allowed to talk about policy. But we lobbied for a meeting with civil servants in government departments who were involved in languages. And we had this meeting in 2 weeks before the election of Blair landslide. The civil servants had 2 sets of policies in their drawer. One, the Conservative policies that they'd been working with, and the other, the new Labour policies that they were about to get out and put into action. And we persuaded them that they would welcome the Nuffield Foundation sponsoring an independent inquiry into languages in the UK. And they gave us a fair warning. And when the new government came in, the ministerial team agreed with that and tacitly supported the Nuffield inquiry, which I was a member of. It met for about 2 years. The language teachers were a small minority on the committee, small but unvocal, I think, surely. It was chaired by Trevor McLaughlin and Sir John Boyd, who was then Master of Church. Wonderful people, but independent of languages. They produced a report, and before we all obviously contributed to it, before it went out, it was passed informally by ministers, who said that's fine. But actually, Andrew Adonis has just had a very bright idea. Why don't we focus all the work that we put into education for languages between 11 and 16? Why don't we start this earlier? Start this at age 7, and then you could stop this at 14, couldn't you? We were, you can imagine, dismayed at this. The government report that came out, Languages for All, Languages for Life, well, it was a great success. The government took the report seriously and produced a language strategy. It wasn't everything we wanted. It was some things we did want. Primary languages, hard to disagree with, but the end of GCSE compulsion was something that we all felt very happy with. It led on to various other initiatives, including an outline, a response on higher education, which was commissioned by the Department for Education and Science, as it was then, led by my old friend Cayley, who set out the implications of the National Language Strategy in higher education. And this was fed in to FD and policies and other stuff. Led into recommendations particularly for increasing outreach in languages to less advantaged students, and was the direct predecessor of the direct cause of the Roots into Languages programme, which I was really delighted to be the director of, and really delighted that it's still going and still doing some great work. And another one, which was a new landscape for languages. So that was the education one. New landscape for languages, in which we put all the facts and figures together about what's been happening to languages for the last 5 years, and tried to predict what would happen for the next 5. This then brings me to summarising advocacy and lobbying, how to go about it, who to address. First thing is, you have to know what you want, and you have to deploy your networks. Now, I also have a strong memory of somewhere around 2009, many of the languages organisations, including the British Academy, including AWL, SILS, UCML and so on, had managed to say, we need to lobby government to do things about languages. And we've got a meeting with ministers. I mean, that's just pure gold in lobbying assemblies. We had a meeting which David Lamb, who's Higher Education Minister, he sat there for about 15 minutes while each of us representing different religious interests chipped in about what we were there for and what we wanted. And after 20 minutes, he said, "Okay, I have no idea what you want. You've no idea what you want. Go away and come back when you've got your act in." End of story. I mean, we sat in shocked silence and jolted on for a while with the civil servants, but that was a decisive learning place. We did go away and we did get our act together, and we got together with the All Party Parliamentary Group. We formed an organisation called Speak to the Future, which the British Academy funded with money that had been lobbed at them by David Willis, coming in as the new Minister for Higher Education in the new government. But the point is, you can't learn that too often. You have to know what you want, and you have to get all your people together to make it. If you want to talk to ministers, don't waste their time. But David Valley taught us all very important lessons, and we all kept an enormous regard for them. And I think it would be very wise on all of you now to make sure that you use the goodwill that we have from somebody like David Lamont, who is able to open doors, able to facilitate networking, and is a real friend of languages and of arts and humanities more broadly. I think he's a real ace in the pack. He won't have time to do that very much. He'll be busy trying to stop the Third World War, but he will be able to open doors and point them towards people. Who are these people that you need to network with and bring together? Well, educational research institutions, I've mentioned plenty of them. Professional associations and organisations, schools, teachers, associations of various sorts. Opinion forms, parliamentarians, you have to work with them. There are plenty of them who are interested and sympathetic. Just to advertise, the latest news from Southampton, the MP for Southampton test is a former colleague of mine, who actually is Spanish athlete, who has just been elected, and who I will try and persuade him to take an interest in your post-elementary group and so on. But you must use people like that. Journalists, there's loads of journalists, and I'm sure UCFL officers are constantly being contacted by journalists. I was contacted by one last week, and heavens, I'm on retired. But they need people to give them good quotes and good information. They can form information. They can form opinion. Celebrities. We put a lot of work into Arsene Wenger back in the day, and he was great. He was a brilliant advocate for languages. And the Arsenal languages football programme was brilliant for as long as it lasted, which was about 10 years or so. It was a real start in promoting languages. All these foreign speaking footballers, you know, more time. Policymakers, we're talking there about civil servants, obviously. We're talking about think tanks, and we're talking about all sorts of state bodies. Talking about politicians who are not in power, even opposition politicians are worth trying. We have meetings with Gillian Shepherd, former Education Secretary, during the Blair administration. She was very supportive of languages, and she gave us inroads into areas that we wouldn't otherwise have got. They were telling me. The army, Hilary Footis and I ran a project on languages at war, in which we had we involved the Army Department for Operational Languages Support. Believe it or not, they have these sorts of things. And we were certainly, I think, instrumental in part in getting them to produce a NATO joint doctrine route, which is very important in NATO, the defendant. And it was linguistic support to operations. Languages are hugely important in war. And I know Charles has been involved in, Charles Forsdick has been involved in the army too. They have needs. And we are suppliers of those news. Business, of course, British Chambers of Council 2013 produced a very nice note on knowledge gaps and language skills hold back exporters. People like these they are policymakers because they have access to government. Government is your ultimate policymaker, and you're talking about ministers. It's very different. You can get ministers to come to high-profile events and presentations, which will be good publicity and they can have their photographs taken. But getting 10 minutes with a minister is inordinately precious. You can really build on that. It's worth the wait. Final slide, my conclusions. Understand the things that we can't change, the strategic issues. We need to know what's happening. We need to be able to kind of respond. Change the things we can change. All the policy areas where we can have an impact, we should get involved in. And finally, the KBO principle, which you all know about. It's an old army slang. Keep buggering on. And it's what we have to do. There was a very nice way that Francisca put it, relentless engagement. I think that's a nicer way of saying KBO, but KBO is always the way to do it. Thank you.
Again, a lot to reflect on there, a lot to learn. I am mindful that we've got another session to another part of this session already. So I think we won't take questions at this point, and maybe if there are questions like that can be part of the broader discussion following the other speaker. But maybe if we could invite Gorrara and Alvise, Charles and Mark Critchley to be online. But thank you very much, Mike. That's really helpful. Thank you. That's to stick first, and then we will have everybody or everybody in the top. Okay, so just come over and have a seat. It is my utmost pleasure to introduce the final section, the final figure, the panel figure. There are a few here, so this last panel will be about reimagining the future of language departments. What will the department of the future look like? So we're going to have a discussion of the 10-point action plan that I will put on the screen in a minute. And we have an introduction about it from Emma, Charles Forsdick, and Charles Burdett. And then there'll be presentations by Plenary, Alvise, Sforza, Tarabochia, Charles Forsdick, and Mark Critchley. He's there online. Hello, Mark. And I know you know everybody, but I'd like to introduce the speakers properly. So you've seen Emma already, and you've heard Emma already. Charles Forsdick is Draper's Professor of French at the University of Cambridge and a Fellow of the British Academy. Charles Burdett is the Director of the Institute of Languages, Cultures and Societies and Professor in Italian Studies. Claire Gorrara, Dean for Research and Innovation for the College of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences. She's also a Professor of French Studies at Cardiff University. Alvise, we introduced you before, but anyway, Head of School of Cultures and Languages at the University of Kent and Senior Lecturer in Italian. And Mark Critchley, Director of the Centre for Foreign Language Study at Durham University, Chair of the Association of University Languages Communities, and Chair of the Editorial Group for the Languages Guild. Very warm welcome. And we'll start with the 10-point plan. And I'll put it on the screen. See if I can do that. I will. What's that?
Sorry, we've done it.
Oh, right. Okay. So.
Brilliant. So I think Marcela's calling up the 10-point plan, which I'm not sure if you will all have already seen in your various associations. I don't want to speak for very long. We've got quite a few speakers. I was just going to say very briefly what this is. It's the result of discussions between various associations represented here today, so UCFL, British Academy, ILCS, others, stating the importance of languages and cultures and highlighting opportunities and challenges, calling for better definition of the subject community, so things that largely we've all been saying today and on other occasions, and importantly the need to work collaboratively across all of our associations and institutions and indeed disciplines to kind of move forward. So the need for collective buy-in, which I think we're all committed to, and for positive narratives. So I think I'm now handing on to Charles, the other Charles.
Wrong one.
This Charles is going.
I'm going to be very quick because this is, we absolutely do need time for discussion afterwards that we've got, for the most part, probably less than 5 minutes. The 10-point plan, just to follow up on a couple of points that Emma has made and what today is all about. There is no doubt that there is a crisis about the nature, about our subject area, about the humanities. We had that very clearly and precisely defined by Joe Fox earlier. Now, the UCFL, the British Academy, and underbody do an excellent job when they are called to respond to institutions. Most recently came to Aberdeen, but there have been many others and there will be more. But when we're talking about Aberdeen and when we're talking about Kent, we are essentially talking about defensive operations. But if we're really going to alter the situation, and that's been clear from so many interventions today, we have to engage in a large-scale change in the national attitude towards languages and culture. And this isn't wishful thinking. Look at STEM. If you think that mathematicians, their understanding of rhetoric, societal change, opinion formation, all the things that we are specialised in and which we are good at, but which we do need to come together. I think the thing is that it's not that the UCFL, the British Academy Subject Association, are not active. They are extremely active and effective. But it would take an extremely long document to summarise all the spheres of the UCFL's activity. However, there are 2 points that are very clearly at the front of everyone's mind. That is the dimension of the current crisis. The second is the need to ensure that initiatives have the support of a cohesive subject community. If they don't, then they are obviously going to be far less effective than they can be, should be. I don't think it's enough to come up with a good initiative, a manifesto, a series of proposals. Clearly, that is absolutely essential, and Mike has spoken very powerfully just now about how we follow through, but we do need to follow through. We need to make sure people understand what you're doing across the range of activities. You need to make sure that they are involved in it. You need to show that they embody it, and you need to go on about it. These are absolutely essential things. Jo talks about the people in the room. She talks about the people outside the room, but she also absolutely talked about the need to protect our disciplinary areas and to protect them in a challenging disciplinary environment in which everyone needs to lean into it. And the people who have the greatest stake in the game, as was made absolutely clear this morning, are early career researchers and postgraduates. So the present document, the 10-point plan, is not a top-down statement or an attempt to reinvent the wheel. Quite the reverse. It has been prepared by the UCFL, ILCS with unofficial support from the British Academy. It has been presented to AMLO, heads of department, subject areas. It's gone through at least 7 iterations, and it won't be finalised until the autumn. But its objective is to ensure that we are trying to get as clear to everyone in the subject community how we can all learn, how we can share, and very precisely, we need to follow through, join up, and support the initiatives that are in train. It's not okay for people not to know about something. I think that the UCFL will deal with that, or there is something on the British Academy website. These things really have to be embodied by all of us if we are going to be effective advocates of our discipline. I was talking earlier to Becky about the fact that it's very easy for people in senior professorial levels to say, well, the UCFL is basically concerned with language culture, and that's it's not really my ball game. And you see that all the time. That is a thing. But it makes no intellectual or ethical sense to actually have that as your starting point. Everyone needs to be really understanding and following through these initiatives. And to recognise that in order to protect what we do, we need to make sure that we are really following. And this is what we're going to follow through. Various points of the plan is how we understand, follow through, whether that's the national strategy, whether that's the inspiring examples of the mentorship programme and what some of the things that have happened in Wales and elsewhere, how these can be rolled out, shared, and embodied, owned, and used in what the demands that we make of government and of the players that Mike has so very clearly pointed us to. That needs to happen at a moment of very clear urgency to all of us. And I'm just going to finish on one point. And the point is, for example, in research, whatever area across the subject community, it isn't about trying to show our applicability by following through narrow, instrumental, utilitarian ideas. It's not about them. It's about showing how, if you're talking about knowledge, you need to talk about interpretation, understanding, cultural understanding, linguistic understanding, positionality, all of things that are absolutely central to the core of our disciplinary area. But that is not necessarily understood outside of our disciplinary area. Joe Fox talked about the Humanities Summit. Almost everything that was good, but there were some very disturbing statements that were made in the course of that day. Some of them, well, do we really need languages where everyone's speaking? That sort of thing. That needs to be combated. But just on the subject of policy, you can have the absolutely excellent work of people like Mike and Wendy and so many others. But you could have an excellent day in this room where you have 4 departments actually coming to a packed meeting and saying, we want to and we need to work with you. Wendy can prepare an absolutely excellent document, but unless every department is saying, of course we need to do policy, this is how we do it, and encourage and take people there, then of course it will be infinitely less effective than it can and should be. So it's on that basis of really ensuring subject buy-in, people having the ability to critique, engage with, but follow through and really take this forward, that we, the UCFL, the BA, in all modesty, the Institute is connecting and making sure that people are aware of, embody, and take forward the wonderful initiatives that people have shown such dedication in preparing and taking us there. Okay, so I'll stop.
I think it's, Charles, it's your turn now.
Right, okay. Your time is. Yeah.
I try. Yeah.
Right, okay, good. Well,
Yeah.
tell me to stop the video.
I'll pull it back.
Great. Look, it's an excellent plenary so far. Some really helpful interventions, with Mike giving us a sense very much of the longue durée here and how what we're doing at the moment fits into a series of initiatives going back several decades, and with Joe a real feeling that the immediacy of how the issues Mike was talking about fit into our current niche and our current reflection on where next. I think the 10-point plan has the potential to be a major part of that. It's an initiative, obviously, that I really welcome. I hope everybody's going to engage with it in terms of its refinement and turning it into a document that we can all get behind and use in multiple contexts. As some of you will know, the British Council Language Trends annual report is due next week. And I mention that because I think it's part of the 10-point plan, and we really need to think about something Mike mentioned, which is where we fit into the languages pipeline. And crucially, in terms of that pipeline, those of us here know this already, but it's simply not enough for us in higher education but to wait for that to be fixed elsewhere, and then the students will reappear, and it'll be business as usual. The crucial message that I think we need to get across is that talk of crisis is not necessarily very helpful because it becomes self-fulfilling. We're actually looking at a process of transformation at the moment. And I think we need to look at the way in which within our departments, we are realigning our provision, realigning our activity with a series of recent interventions, not least work at the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Languages towards national languages strategy. But we're also thinking about how we fit in with new initiatives like the National Consortium of Language Education. Some of you might know about Ben Rampton and colleagues at KCL and beyond, their new coalition for language learning, which is doing that crucial work of bringing together EAL modern languages, allow us to think about whole heritage community languages in different ways. There's a policy dimension inevitably here. Joe, Mike and others have already underlined that. Towards a national languages strategy, the document launched in 2020 very much reflects that. And I think we've got a moment now when we can think collectively about a policy us. In terms of that pipeline, in terms of what we need in higher education, what's essential for me, I think resolving the issues Mike mentioned at primary level, which are not yet really sorted around non-statutory guidance for primary languages, around sorting out the transition from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3, very important. Focusing on GCSE and its equivalent. There's a debate to be had about the retention of the EBAC, I think, which is a useful tool for us. The previous government launched a consultation around what they called the Advanced British Standard, consultation on post-16 education. Now, quite what's going to happen to that, we don't know, but it was a very useful forum for us interested in the diversification of the curriculum, post-16 and including the languages to get together. I think there are issues around, and I think we'll get some traction here, support for qualifications in home heritage and community languages. British Academy now is firmly advocating following reintegration to Horizon for our rejoining Erasmus, when that's really goes to 2027. I think as a community we need to reflect on that, and crucially thinking about what Joe said and thinking about the mismatch between institutional autonomy and this lack of centralised planning for languages. We need to reflect seriously on the feasibility of a higher education regulator who would precisely prevent the emergence of cold spots. So a lot to play for at the moment. In terms of the 10-point plan, the one aspect, just to be clear, the one aspect I wanted to focus on, and this is partly to do with the state I and a number of others in the room had in the last ref, is to think about the place of research there in the 10-point plan. Joe very helpfully laid out the issues about the disconnect between, and we saw this in the session about Kent and Aberdeen, the disconnect between research strength and planning around departmental sustainability. There is something deeply dysfunctional in UK higher education at the moment, partly to do with the way in which research and development and university teaching are dealt with by different departments. And that's why we get in a situation where a department with world-leading research, recognised by REF, has its research activity significantly under threat. I think a move here is to rejoin the two, and I think the plan sets out a number of initiatives there. One is that crucial idea about the fostering of a new public idea about language, which we've been working on for a while, but I think we need to continue, as Spike said, pushing on with that, recruiting champions, supporting initiatives like the Language Gateway, about which Mark will speak, normalising domestic multilingualism as well, which I think when things have moved on, like from that context you were talking about, that acknowledgement of the UK as a multilingual country, and that sense that the languages of the UK are an incredibly underutilised and unrecognised resource. So I think there's work around that public idea of languages. Linked into that, I think, is the valuing of the diversity of research in our subject area. We have a lot to offer in terms of knowledge of other cultures, but there's always in our subject areas a counterflow. Our work has a domestic pertinence too, whether that's comparative, whether that's translation. And sometimes it's in that counterflow, the way knowledge we acquire in engaging with other cultures and languages and societies, that we see real traction with policymakers. And I'll finish here, because I think this is one of the key points. Charles has mentioned it already, but it's one of the key points in the 10-point plan, is that what we're seeing, not least through some of the ref impact case studies, but this is not all about ref, it's about a much broader range of activity, is that it's not just colleagues in linguistics, it's colleagues working on culture and society too, who have significant inputs in terms of language sensitive policy making. Some excellent initiatives emerging just over the past couple of years. Wendy Ayres-Bennett, my colleague in Cambridge, with a number of other collaborators launching the Language Society and Policy Journal, Wendy's report produced last year. And we're very grateful for the support of UCFL and MHRA to take some of the recommendations there forward, not least around translating our research into forms which are consumable by policymakers. Series of meetings ongoing with a number of departments who I think, thinking back, Mike, 20, 30 years, we wouldn't have imagined with our interlocutors, the Home Office. It was very much rooted in your work, but we now begin to get traction there. The Home Office, couple of weeks seminar with the Department of Health and Social Care. So we're really getting, and this is one of the points in the 10-point plan, we're really getting to a point where we're realising the foregrounding of language sensitive policy making provides us with an opportunity to demonstrate the ubiquity of language-related research, to demonstrate the importance of having a workforce with high-level multilingual skills. That leads to, again, positive recommendations, I think, about training, particularly making sure that everybody, ECRs and beyond, understand the role we can play in policy making. It means access to the areas of research interest produced by local departments, and also encouraging those who produce those ARIs to think more about languages, and crucially it means brokerage as well. I shall stop there. But again, Mike, thinking back, I don't think 20 years ago we can imagine a cross-government languages group made up of about 6,000 civil servants who are committed precisely to the importance of languages and recognising the importance of language policy. I'll come back to that idea of crisis. We often feel that on the ground, but really we're talking about a moment of transformation as well, and possibly a process of transformation, which is about something.
I don't know who would like to go next. Alvise, Claire, Mark.
Shall we next?
Yeah.
Video and just
Yeah, we try to business.
So I think I've been asked to speak about mentoring, which is one of the proposed practical suggestions in the 10-point plan. I really will come on.
I can share with you some.
Yeah. So I'm going to. So just to give a little bit of context here, this project was commissioned by the Welsh Government in 2015. I've got to say one thing, colleagues, you're talking about England all the time here. Different curriculum in Wales, different government in Wales, same for Scotland and Ireland. So just to be a little bit, we've got provocative here to be an English only session so far. Thank you very much. I'm going to be talking about a mentoring programme commissioned by the Welsh Government in 2015, which is still active. And it is a language agnostic project doesn't promote any particular language. It attempts to inspire and to motivate young people aged 14, 15 to do language GCSE. And I want to begin with this film which we've made. I think hopefully incorporates. Next slide, please. Yeah, you could press on the hopefully that is the ethos of the product, hopefully.
From the very beginning, we seek out ways to communicate with the world around us. We learn to play, to laugh, to walk and to talk, and sometimes to say nothing at all. We seek out ways to express ourselves and to understand. Simple gestures, a smile, a frown, a thumbs up, a wave, connect us to the world around us. Hello, bonjour, kaixo, shalom. So many ways to offer a bridge between you and me. The world can seem like an infinitely vast land, full of peoples and places that we may never reach nor understand. But luckily for us, the world is right here, in every single country, in every single town, in every single school. The world makes its mark on each of us. Look around you, listen to the sounds, savor the tastes, and embrace the vastness of this place we call home. With MFL mentoring, you'll discover that this is not just Wales. This is the world. MFL mentoring, opening doors to other worlds. Let the journey begin.
Welsh accent. I'm also right, but you can see that project there is if you go to the next slide. That's all good. Yeah. So you can see this. So the NFI mentoring project doesn't aim to promote a particular language, but promote an ethos and approach to the world about communication, languages, the domestic multilingualism. I think that Charles picked out there. And it's based in Wales, a bilingual nation with a very strong multilingual heritage, and a country which has a very progressive ethos in its own mind and amongst policymakers as an outward-facing country. And it's been commissioned because this is the symptom. Currently in Wales, it's lower now. 10.35% of young people in Wales will learn a language, French, Spanish, or German at GCSE. And last year, only 58 people in the whole of Wales did German A-level. That's a small maths A-level class in an NV college. So we have a really, really difficult situation. A-level also in a very low position to be doing a language at A-level as well. Only 305 children are learning French, Spanish, or German. About the same are actually for Welsh. Even though Welsh is compulsory for GCSE, about 90% will do Welsh at GCSE. Going on to the non-compulsory element, Welsh is actually even less popular than one of the foreign languages at A-level. So there is a general discomfort, disjuncture, disconnection for young people with So what's the problem? I think the problem is one that Lucy, my colleague, and I have been thinking about very actively. It is about economic growth and about the fact that we obviously are losing at a financially very, very disadvantageous rate our connection with the relative GDP. It's about the future workforce and being able to meet the limited needs about a particular workforce of the future. It's about lack of competitiveness, and again, I think we know that there's this stat here as well, that many of our young people in the UK and in Wales are far less proficient in more than one language than our comparator colleagues and young people in the EU as a whole. And also, and a really key point here, discounted from reality. We know that over 160 schools are languages are spoken in schools in Wales. And I think from a recent piece of research by the DFE, 1 in 5 young people in schools in England do not have English as a first language. So 20% of all young people in English schools do not speak English at home as a first language. So we're obviously disadvantaging our young people, actually asking to leave their other language at the door of the school rather than bring them in to be part of our community. And also very important as well for Wales as well, the question of social cohesion. If you have language disjuncture, language blindness, language hostility, lingual phobia, a term that Charles has used in relation to Brexit, and that's a really generative part of this project, Brexit, I think you have a very, very difficult time in imagining the multilingual, multicultural space that the Welsh Government, who runs the project, actually wishes to see, and we wish to see within Wales as a whole. So what's our aim? Thanks, Charles. Next slide. Our aim is to increase the uptake of a language at GCSE in Wales, that very, very small number there. And we do it through partnership. So we effectively work at Cardiff with every single other HEI in Wales, and you can see them all limited there. And we ask those universities to promote our project and for us to train undergraduate and postgraduate students to become mentors on our programme. Importantly, in the first year of the programme, they were all modern language linguists undergraduates. Now they're bioscientists, they're PhD students in computer science, they're people doing engineering. It's anybody with an interest in languages, who's a heritage speaker, has a qualification at some level, or who wants to be part of a strong project of outreach and civic engagement. We've trained so far over 700 students, and we're active in 80% of all secondary schools in Wales. There are about 180 of those schools in Wales, and we're there with about 80%. And actually, we've engaged thus far with our mentors. We've engaged about 20,000 young people in schools in Wales. So in other words, we go into a school and we say, survey your students in years 8 and 9. All those students who say, I want to do a language for GCSE, it's about 16% they say it, we don't mentor them. The ones that say, I don't want to do a language at all, I dislike them completely, we don't do them. We work with the ones that say, I don't know. And about 30% of young people at 14 say, I don't know. So there's a very large group of young people who are uncertain about doing a language. And those are the students that we work with over 6-week programs based around a multilingual program driven by curiosity that we work with our trained undergraduate and postgraduate mentors to go into those schools, both virtual and also face-to-face, to encourage and inspire those young people to want to think about being a multilingual person. And somebody who's multilingual in Wales, you don't have to go outside Wales to speak French. It's about trying to say, even if you never go and visit, Latin America, or you may never go to Spain, having Spanish as part of your portfolio of skill sets and your development as a young person is going to be personally enriching. We don't push career, because a 14-year-old doesn't really care about career. 14-year-old wants to be personally enriched. They think about themselves as a person in formation. It's who their future self will be. And the program is about saying, look at Jane over there, who went to Barcelona for a year. She's 22. She's very cool. She comes into your school. She speaks 3 languages. You could be her. And for many of our young people, it's that aspirational role model, that's near-peer learner, that is very, very inspiring. So the next slide. So basically what we do is we develop partnerships with ourselves in those 10 universities with a whole series of secondary schools across Wales. And we provide what we call peer-to-peer or near-peer learning. So Jordan at 14 in Merthyr Tydfil is mentored by Andrew, 22, from Birmingham. And over those 6-week programs, about 4 to 6 young people work with Andrew, and he's a 6-week program of inspirational, thought-provoking, learner-centered engagements with those young people. We've got those target groups in schools, those undecided learners. We provide innovative resources that actually are linked to those young people's interests. So we don't force feed them a course book. There's no course book. It's all about working with those young people to actually determine what is of interest to them. And we create a training program where we train the mentors and also the teachers as well to use evidence-based tools to understand what would inspire Jane, Jordan, David to want to do a language, because everybody's different. It won't work with David what works with Jane or what works with Fionn. It's about understanding what the individual person, what's going to be the trick for them to go, do you know what, drama or French? I'm going to choose French. Because in the end, it's competitive in a curriculum-based option module. You have to be more interesting than drama, PE, you know, more than PE, or history. And it's about them going, actually, I think that's worth doing. We also create bespoke evaluation tools that help those us rethink and improve the programme by iterating how it works with those young people. And you can see in the little corner there, a very important stat for me. If you work with us as a mentee child, you are 3 times more likely to do the language GCSE than if you're not mentored by us. So it's 10% average in Wales. We reach 40% in the schools that we work with of those young people who said, I'm not sure, at the end of it all, 40% of them will go on to choose a language at GCSE. So we can triple the uptake of a language in your schools. If you're a teacher, we are a fabulous resource. You get a young person for 6 weeks, or maybe even 12 weeks over 2 semesters. You get a highly inspired person in your classroom, and importantly, you often reach past the 10 number required to run the GCSE class. Often 10 or below, the head teacher will not run the class. So we actually provide that incremental buzz for that class to run. And why does it work? My last slide. I think it works because we take new approaches that disrupts the classroom teaching. We're porous. We're in the classroom, but we're not in the classroom. We're not doing the curriculum. We're not doing grammar. We're talking about those snippets of language, fun, debate, multilingual mindset that makes that young person feel connected to a world outside the classroom. We work with targeted groups, so we work with those uncertain pupils. We're very, very strategic. It's not the whole class, it's that small group that have the ability to move the way that we would like them to move. We develop a resource that is driven by curiosity, so we often work with object-based learning. We don't go through, pets, hobbies, holidays. We absolutely do work on how to be curious about, cultures in Mexico, how to work with food in Australia, how to think about working with emojis in Japan. We deliberately try and attract that young person, 14, 15, that why is it like that? Why is that culture like that? How does it relate to me? And we also develop training programs that can be used to iterate and develop the program to improve it year on year for schools. We give each school actually a database, a data dashboard after each iteration for them to see how the learning's worked, where their students sitting, and where their learners are changing or adapting or shifting their mindset. So that also the schools get back rich data around their learner cohorts and what the learner cohorts are developing in terms of their language profile. And then the last slide, we're also very well aware that what we do is also about working across the world. Because we work with New Zealand, we're working with Spain, and therefore we do understand that we're working through the word POB or communications. That means communicating well, proper communication, people. So basically it's about community is everyone's business. We work very much through the whole notion of being about developing communication skills that are not only about our young people in the classroom, but also about trying to induct them into seeing a language beyond Korean translation or interpreting, but as part of a broader skill set that makes them feel better about themselves. Age 14, if you can say a few things in French without feeling embarrassed about yourself, and you can have a laugh in French, Spanish or German, you're going to take it. If you feel hyper anxious, worried, or unsure about its value to you, you're not. So it's our job is to convert that mindset from anxiety and fear of failure to be prepared to give it a go. Yeah, so that's really what we do.
Should we have Mark next? And then Alvise. Mark.
Yes, I'm happy. I can focus my talk. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. I'm sorry I can't be with you today. Something came up yesterday, which meant I haven't been able to travel down to London today. But I'm going to be relatively brief, I think. And I want to focus on two aspects of the 10-point plan. The first part about the narrative and the last part about the advocacy. And then also just reflecting back on some of the things that Cayley shared with us on the talk before. And thinking as well about what would the departments of the future look like in the context of all of this. So the important thing for the 10-point plan, which is why I'm so supportive of it, is it gives us that opportunity to speak together with a common voice, because at the present time, many of us are trying to justify ourselves individually, and we're coming together as a community with a common narrative will help us all, because ultimately we're all trying to do the same sorts of things. And the important thing then for me is Mike mentioned that we have to know what we want. And that for me is something I think that still we need to develop and flesh out a bit in the 10-point plan document. And in particular, thinking about the words there, we have to know what we want. We also need to reflect on who we are, who we mean by we. And there's a whole range of actors that are then discussed throughout the 10-point plan. For example, teacher training, societal impact, policy. I don't want to use the word advocacy again, but policy interaction is probably the best phrase. And we need to think about how we want to engage with that as a whole discipline rather than necessarily as our own individual departments. I'm speaking to you today partly because of my role as chair of the Association of University Language Communities, and we deal with institution-wide language learning and various things about engaging with language learners beyond the degree. But principally, I want to talk to you today in my role as chair of the editorial group for the Languages Gateway, because the Languages Gateway itself it's the public face of the emerging new national languages strategy. And Mike's given us a whole history going back 30 odd years of the developments in policy, which we've been continually reproducing. But the Languages Gateway does give us an independent platform that we can use to the common good, that we can then speak to our audience, or more importantly, our audiences, because the narratives we want to use will inevitably be different depending on who we want to talk to. So the narrative we will give to senior management will inevitably be a different narrative to the one we give to policymakers or that we give to parents. And then coming finally onto the matter of advocacy, we need to decide what it is, or who it is we're saying we are, what it is we're saying we want, how we think we want to achieve it, and what will success look like? How will we know when we have achieved it? So that there's an element there that I think we need to think about, for example, what in IWLP terms might be called minimum service levels. We've talked about cold spots over many months as well. What is it that's at the core of our discipline that we want to deliver? What are we trying to turn around from the previous narrative? And what do we therefore want to say we want to deliver in the future? And in the future, we're really talking about the next generation. So Claire and Charles have both mentioned early career, young people, near peer mentors and all that sort of thing. And we're really trying to find solutions, not necessarily for our own problems that we've got today, but for to avoid the future problems that might come down the road in 25 years' time. So I really just wanted to really give my full support to the Languages Gateway, to the 10-point plan, to offer the Languages Gateway as a platform that we can use to do it, and then to encourage all of the universities who are present in this meeting to get behind both the plan and the Languages Gateway so we can use it to our common good. And I'll probably leave it at that.
And Alvise, it's your turn.
Thank you very much. I'll be speaking more at the local level rather than to the 10 points down. Let's try to. And as Charles has said, I think our position is defensive at the moment. Our actions have been very defensive. At the same time, we took that as an opportunity, as an opportunity. We try to make the most of it. We try to use that position to see how we could rethink the provision of modern languages. And maybe, even though it is very local and very specific what is happening to us, maybe it provides a template for a potential vision of how modern languages could work in a very challenging education context. So we have to compete with a lot of factors, especially governmental dictates and declarations about the business and so forth, but also linguophobia, absolutely. Exams being particularly difficult for languages at say level markets, but being particularly harsh, all sorts of things. And then we have to compete also with AI, like mathematicians have to compete with calculators. I remember when I was growing up, why should I study mathematics? Because you will not always have a calculator. Yes, now I do always have a calculator. But I'm still glad I studied mathematics. But it's the same thing today. We cannot say with any confidence to anyone wanting to study a language, you have to study a language because you will never have in your brain an implant that just moves your mouth in a foreign language. I mean, it's already happening. It's just not implanted in our brains. But we are already there. AI is already replacing speaking a foreign language. And the other thing we noticed that we have to compete with is the very process of learning languages. Absolutely. doom scrolling, TikTok, watching videos and just saying, oh, dating, Tinder, yes, no, yes, no, learning a language, Italiano, bene, fatto, tac, tac, tac. An immediacy of the learning that is not mediated by teachers, it makes it incredibly challenging. One can't even start thinking how to remodel everything around such a quickly changing technology. So you throw everything in there, you get the tiny box in which we had to think at the University of Kent, and we thought, okay, so let's think the other way around. Let's make it the core provision of modern languages what we have in common as linguists, as language learners. How do we empower our students to learn a language, any language, think in another language, work with other languages, whatever career they might want to take. So that will be our core provision. Modules called studying languages, the basics of linguistics, very general things. They can use English, they can use their own native language to work on those. And then more advanced topics on intercultural communication, on global cultures, how do different cultures and foreign people interact in a business context, in a cultural context, in an artistic context, and so forth. So this will be the core provision. And languages, since also we need to provide institution-wide language learning and language learning for our core students, we will provide in the first year what we provisionally have called a language lab / tutorial, and an informal space where students work on self-study material mostly, and they can use their apps, they can use their Duolingo, but they have a safe space in which they can come and they know they will have a specialist there or a native speaker of that language that will help them with the self-study materials, will interact with their apps, will provide further self-study materials, and they can do that at any level because they will not sit in a room and have a class on a specific grammar topic. It will be an informal space where they know they have someone. And at the end of that, we will provide a placement test. This optional placement test, which doesn't give them a mark, but will give them the level they more or less have achieved. This will help for students who can only take the language lab and cannot take credit-bearing language modules because they have no space there. Curriculum in their curriculum for the modules, and they will help. It will help them in particular if they need to go abroad and if there is a minimum level that they need to have achieved. After that, in stages 2 and 3, they will progress into language immersion modules, and that will be more formalized, and that will be credit bearing, and that will be in progression 1, 2, and 3. But the idea is to create a space where we can try to ride the wave of apps, of doom scrolling, of AI, and we can try to tame that and use it to our own advantage and create this safe space for students where they can be helped in their own process of learning. Whereas on the other hand, we identify as core that which makes us all language learners, language enthusiasts, language curious, and so forth. So yeah, maybe a vision for the future.
Thank you very much. So if you're okay with me asking questions and comments, unless somebody wants to say something else, we can start with that. We've got a comment in the chat that I can read. From Cayley Forsdick. Are we realigning our traditional spatial perceptions of the language department? And given that many universities have languages based in a variety of differently named departments, rather see diasporic language departments, which we need to recognize, learn from, and celebrate.
I mean, I would agree with the rest of the year. I do think we've got to prepare to move out of current structural configurations. I really do. I think, you know, one of the great benefits is the community building, and we'll talk about that. I might get a very good community building across language skills, and we also need to get community practice. But on the other hand, I think as Francisca made very clear in her really powerful presentation, allyship on subjects, co-teaching, common interests are an important part of our future. And I think you have to be very mindful about that. It's great and co-produce work. You've got to be those word courageous. And if all of a sudden a school of modern languages is no longer a single unit, it doesn't mean that there can't be ways for linguists and languages to have renewed rhizome-like connections across more subjects in more ways at the university. I know that's festival and it sounds like I'm saying that we all do. I'm not saying that much. So we've got to be brave that we're strong enough, confident enough in ourselves. That means we're changing and we're diversifying. We're not losing ourselves. But I feel that many of our colleagues wouldn't see it like that.
And we're finding that change is really hard, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yes. Sometimes you've got to embrace it on some level to be able to adapt to it. Music like riding the wave. If you want things to happen to you, that's when things tend to go down that wave. You can look at the opportunities, and I'm a bit polyandrish there. I think there's chances for really interesting teaching and research, which wouldn't happen if you remain in singularities, like learning with singularities, and then insisting that.
Just to add to that, absolutely, I think that it's not incompatible with understanding some of the core elements of your subject area, like the reverse. It is having a more, as you say, courageous vision of that. We do absolutely need to be a little bit self-critical of some of the ways that we operate. For example, so much effort spent on the ref, which doesn't actually address questions of student recruitment or indeed public recognition of what we do. So there is, as Joe Fox said, a question to be raised about how we best use our efforts when we are time compressed. And I think part of the way in which we need to reconfigure things is also, and I mentioned this a bit this morning, getting slightly beyond the ideology and competition in which departments are competing with one another, both in terms of their research standing, but also their ability to recruit students. It is only by cooperating that we are going to, and sharing at the same time as accepting that we are in competition. I had a good word the other day at the knowledge diplomacy event, and that was co-opetition. So an element of understanding the bigger picture, really getting that into the way in which we operate, being less keen to compete with one another, although that is a factor or other, and very much learning and cooperating and seeing that bigger picture as part of what we do is essential.
I think the early curriculum was really doing this. Early curriculum was already operating across healthcare sciences and law. I think that, again, I come back to generational. It's this generation challenge, generation shift. They're learning curriculum and can see opportunities, and they are. If they're not at university, they have options beyond languages in a good way, and they can be essential if they drive there. So I think it depends where you're sitting and your institutional histories. I think when they're in the past, institutional histories do drive many of us here. They've been there a long time, a long time at Cardiff. And sometimes we can get sucked into a sense of themselves that's 30 years old. And institutions sometimes do drag you into their own sets themselves. It's quite difficult. So literally put your feet out of the fog line. So actually I don't have to stand down here. I can stand somewhere else. So I think that's a factor, but I think someone's got to contest those.
And just to respond to Hilary on the sort of diasporic configurations, I think what we're talking about here is a spectrum of different structures, because disciplinary sustainability depends on infrastructure, and I would be worried by a situation where we no longer had any language departments, because I think that could become problematic for our disciplinary folks. I'm equally worried by a situation, which I think often we're in now, where our quantification of the health of languages depends on recognising a number of discrete language departments. And what Hilary's talking about there is something really important. And I think UCFL are great at recognising this. that language degrees exist in institutions where there are no language partners. And they're often very productive interdisciplinary spaces in their programs. And I think it's that breadth of a vision about what encompasses language learning and language research. So I think Hillary's quite right that we, and I think many people in this room do this already, but we tend much more open understanding of what a language really looks like, what a language unit might look like in the university.
And I can different, that's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
That's okay. Many of our colleagues don't see it that way. They're not doing languages, it's
Yeah.
not this way.
Thank you. Related to Mark's comment,
You shout this so they can hear it.
related to Mark's comment about who we are and what we want. I think a few times during the day, comments have come up talking about the integrated study of language and culture on the one hand and what's been called service language teaching on the other. And I think I've queried it a few times. And I feel there's an implied hierarchy that the integrated study of language and culture is somehow better or more central to this space or something. But Mark, I hope the fact that you're in the room and you're part of this 10-point plan means that all types of language teaching are being valued and being included. But I just wanted to check that was the case.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, looking at institution-wide language program as one part of a spectrum, where with deep immersion at the other end, I tend to focus on it from a school's perspective. So if you look at the people who are learning languages in school, not all of them will inevitably go on and do a languages degree, and we need to still support their language learning interests. So personally, I very much see all aspects of language learning as being equally important in the narrative, but we need to get the narrative straight so we can signpost students with different interests in different directions.
Thank you.
The critique is, if anything, of those who see culture as possibly being abstracted from language. And it is absolutely the case that that doesn't make sense to anyone. As Mike said, if you try to talk to anyone in government and you say, well, I just talk about culture and I leave the language to someone else. Well, it's the language that's really essential to everything that we do. And I think the 10-point plan absolutely embraces what you say. The hierarchy is to the detriment of all of us, needs to be recognised.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is very useful and I agree with that. But I'm just wondering, we do have a more utilitarian cohort of that, particularly with some of the students. So I was wondering, given the difficulty of getting built and so forth, whether the 10-point plan addresses affordability. If we all get open days where someone would say, I'm thinking of doing French and German, but what should I get in? And there are lots of adequate arguments that we made if we were worried about enhancing cultural awareness and changing mindsets and so forth. But in the end, partly because of fees and also some other reasons, we have a new cohort of students who have a more understanding of utilitarian kind of approach to this. And of course, we can quote reams of data from the career service about you can get a job in publishing, etc. But I'm just wondering how how employability is woven into the 10-point plan, kind of addressing that demand.
I'd like to respond.
Yeah.
I think that's the Humanities Summit. This was a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, in some respects, dealing with the fact that people do get humanities, but there are significant issues about finance, where you're going to go with that, and it is beholden upon the humanities as a whole to really think about its applicability and indeed its employment pathways more structurally and more powerfully than it does at the moment. And that, I think, I would not disagree with that. But it is, of course, for individual institutions coming together, of course, where possible, to address that issue because it is very much on the table.
If I can add to that, I think many of us are introducing things like internships or placements, which are also being introduced by science department, the non-language department, so they send their students abroad to the education council. I don't know if that's something you can tap into to legitimize the going abroad factor. The fact that there are departments that are not language departments, so they'll send the students abroad.
We've got Naomi Ruber, but there's also Susan Fitzmaurice who had asked a question, and then if you know. Susan, are you there?
Yes, I am. I'd like to really applaud the 10-point plan. I think that it really is a good call to arms, but I kind of feel that it's quite passive. I think focused on developing and sharing the narrative about this subject community itself. And I think we need to demonstrate the importance of languages. And to do that, I think we've got to be much more proactive, much more on the front foot. And it's something that I think Charles said earlier. I think we've got to think about realigning our curricula, reshaping them to be attractive to students, to meet them where they are. Now, clearly, as the earlier talks indicated, colleagues at Aberdeen and Kent did this, but they had to do it, and they had to do it as a defensive measure when directly threatened. So I think that the community is beleaguered, but that isn't any reason to wait until directly challenged or threatened department by department. And I think as a community, we need to be on the front foot, cooperate and collaborate and think much more proactively and creatively about how we repurpose and make our curricula much more useful, because ultimately we've got to get the students in. And we can, the long game is getting languages properly, embedded in schools and so on. But in the shorter term, I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that we are as accountable as we can be for our own sustainability. Sorry, that wasn't really a question. It was a bit of a declaration, but I'm really happy to engage if anybody wants to come.
Susan, thanks for that. But very briefly, one of the documents we drew on for the 10-point plan was the recently revised QAA benchmarking statement for languages, cultures and societies. And I think that provides a little orientation similar to yours, Susan, in that it says, look, we need to think about sustainability, we need to think about global challenges, we even need to think about entrepreneurship in our programs. One of the things I'm seeing, and this is the case in Liverpool, and it's now the case of my new institution, is that a number of our graduates are go on and have extremely entrepreneurial skills. And it's what they learned during their degree, particularly during the year abroad, fed into that. So I think it's a challenge to every department. I know many of you have done this already, but take out the new QAA benchmarking statement. Just think about what it means with your group.
Could I just add to, following on from Susan's point, the AMLUC, Association for Modern Languages, Area Studies and Linguistic Subject Associations, appreciated, wanted the 10-point plan, but following the station, did think that it was not powerful or in your face enough, and endorsed a redrafting in which we do actually stress more how we do actually really want to get behind me. So thank you, Susan.
Thank you very much. We've got 3 questions, and I think then we're going to come to an end.
So people minute. I am between languages and digital humanities, so I will say that before. I do just want to say on digital, I think it's the same question of not talking about crisis. We can always talk about digital in terms of threat. It suggests we're on the back foot. It suggests we are becoming obsolete because of technologies instead of threat. And I think we need, given it's been made in Alvise, I think, there are created, there's critical ways we can engage with this. And a lot of people are doing that. And do we need a really targeted, because of this digital, we had that bit on the times prior, is AI the death knell? And actually AI, they need us to come in and say, what are ethical and critical uses of AI in relation to languages, in relation to, generated text, which is, threatening all disciplines because you use it in that term. But I just wonder, because the digital is becoming so good, and as I say, I have a particular positionality on this, but do we need a really targeted strategy? It is part of the plan, but do we really need to think in a much more focused way about the digital as an opportunity and not being on the back foot and thinking as right.
Yes, but I think it's quite us to offer but at the moment, the Legal Mentoring Project, we're working with Duolingo. So actually, and you've got quite a precise point, you've got Chancellor Avatar, we're going to try and work with for language learning. So actually, I think there's a great deal of like consultancy and spin out, literally, because AI, language learning is a multi-billion pound industry, right? You know, and we should be working with those companies and their organizations, those policies, to actually encourage their own skill sets and experience and also support that just for us. So I think that there could be a very, very productive set of relationships if we don't get into fearful of taking our jobs, because actually not taking our jobs. They are a large language model, engineering and precise folks. They were basically data analysts, a lot of them. So it's about working with them to ensure our cultural competency and their expertise as teachers supports them, and they support us to ensure our community students get the best experience in language learning that brings them digital skills they can go on to use elsewhere. So I think we've got to be both the people learning as us to actually work, letting in collaborative competition thing. But I actually think that there is a better realm really key to us. So I think that there's a great opportunity there that has most of it has to be as commercial benefit for languages, not just for them, but for us. I think we've got to get over a little bit the anxiety that working with those people out there somehow is going to threaten our integrity of academics. Because at the moment, the shake us off the sea is a really big thing.
Yeah, absolutely. We had 3 students this year as a trial project working with a video game developer in Chicago, modeling AI responses for characters in the game that interact with AI. So yeah, no, absolutely, it has to be taken as an opportunity, because if we continue to react, we're just going to lose to that. Yeah. So.
3 really brief points. That Times Higher article was deeply frustrating because it shows you what we're up against. It shows you what we're up against. There's a doom mongering in the press around languages and almost a self-fulfilling prophecy about language learning. And we've really got to counter that. Just to say very briefly, Open Days, and a number of you who experienced this, get a question every time now. Why should I do a language degree? AI is going to deal with all that. But this is maybe a recommendation challenge for UCFL. Wouldn't it be great to have a plenary where we can actually work on a script which would be useful for all of us, faced with that question on Open Days, but also trying to get some of the case studies.
There are some great studies.
The case studies of our graduates who are actually harnessing the potential here as opposed to seeing it independent.
FinTech Wales, FinTech Wales, multi-million pound publicly funded body for English. So they're out there, guys, and they have our language.
I'm going to go with this. Yeah.
Don't know.
It's a very, very good question. You mentioned something about 35% of students are learning international languages. Okay. What do you mean by international languages?
Yeah, okay, sorry, yes, okay, so it's translation across England and Wales. So you've been talking England a lot today, I'm talking Wales back to you. So basically in Wales, we have jumped the word modern foreign language. The project was called NFL Mentoring, because we're in 2015, and NFL was the term used by teachers of languages in Wales to teach languages. Now in Wales, the term is international languages, and that covers BSL, heritage and community languages, classics, and the whole modern language suite that we have. So international language is the term is in the curriculum by the Welsh government for language learning, that's apart from the Welsh and English.
Fantastic. It's more inclusive, I suppose.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, just a few notes just to say how inspiring some of the things that you've been talking about feeling today. And a few observations about our discipline and how you were in, I think, a defensive mode for many years. And actually, Mike, it was lovely to go through that trip through the memory lane. It was a thoughts and think about some of the journey undertaken. I discipline I think that in quite a positive way, shedding off this kind of 19th century shape to use that. And, the year abroad was a 19th century concept. And a few years ago, I was kind of really concerned with the year abroad sounded to our institution, old fashioned. And people were coming up with you know, the global graduates and placements. And I was thinking, we've done all that before, and we're kind of lost in this. So we started calling the year of the international placement year. And it's that kind of language. It's like using the language that we've created those global concepts, those mobility concepts. And I think it's really important that we, I think, you know, we use some of these challenges to get out of ourselves. I would be happy to hear that on my way down yesterday, spent some time just like you. Remembering some of the, you know, where have we come from? And my observations were, you know, some of the things you were talking about there, like they seemed outlandish. Oh, we could have argument weeds. Oh, we could have Jordan solids. That came to pass. And that served us well for it, but it's no longer what was going to serve us. So what are the new shapes of our discipline? And what I was also I mentioned this morning that we're here, I was really noticing how so much of what you said will go outside your share, without collaborates. And I feel that some of the threats put us in the fear space. You know, what you do is hold it down rather than open up. And I think, you know, the conversation then has really reminded me that no one's hunkered down, but there is always that feeling that they're going to defend it long rather than, you know, jumping in this community. And some of the things that we were calling unique 20 years ago came to pass. They seemed that lunch at the time, it went good for them. And I'm very inspired. I mean, I used to come to those things and really use that knowledge. And I think like also my regret is that we assumed that somehow by writing a report it would get enacted, and it didn't happen. We have to have it's not just writing a report, it's writing the implementation plan, and it doesn't happen naturally. It does have to actually put into action. I think Joe reminded you that all those reports, they're just paper unless we get out there and make them reality. That is quite a bit complex. And once you do it on your own for it, I don't know what really it's.
Look at one very brief, sorry, last question.
Yeah, this is comment. So firstly, thank you so much for very inspiring set of papers. My very short question is just in relation to the 10-point plan and the language of CFH you mentioned a few times. Are those available yet? Yeah, so there's some of the
No, sorry, no, one of them is, one isn't. So the gateway is launched.
Right.
And open for recommendations for new material. There's an editorial group, and there's a way you can contribute to that. We really want to get the word out about that. And we're talking to new partners. 10-point plan, not yet, but Charles would.
No, this is a stage of the 10-point plan to take what people think about them, rewrite the 10-point plan, and hopefully in the autumn, really to be rolling it out as an overall script as to where we're trying to get.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very, very much, everyone.